Hey everybody, welcome to another episode. Sorry I took last week off, but we're back again. I had an epiphany last night that the NRL 22 championships were a couple weeks ago, and I'm like, hey, let's kind of go through that, talk to these guys about what they went through, training to go into the NRL 22 championships, and maybe we can talk Vudoo. We can do a little bullshit session. First off, of course, I always want to thank Benchmark Barrels for supporting us. If you haven't checked out their new stuff yet, they just released a cold carbon fiber line, which I'm excited about. From what I've heard talking to Benchmark, these are going to be kind of a new industry standard, from what they've said, and I haven't shot one yet, but over time of shooting it, the point of impact doesn't change. You can put 10 rounds, 20 rounds through it, where sometimes some of the others have done it. So I'm excited to check them out. I'm going to try and get one on order. Hopefully they're going to have them, available for like the Vudoos, the Remexes and stuff like that. So the 22 side, Benchmark's been a big, supporter of the 22 side of things, which a lot of people don't realize either. You can buy prefits from them, which is cool. Anyway, let's welcome the guys tonight. How you guys doing?
Good. How you doing?
Not too bad.
Good. Let's first introduce Tony G. Now, everybody's kind of seen John here before, but Tony, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thanks for having me on tonight, guys. Tony Gimmellie, 10.5 years in the Marine Corps, Marine Scout Sniper for about 8 of my 10 years, part of an anti-terrorism unit, and got out, taught CQB and hostage rescue, got out, 19 years with the Secret Service, and I've been a professional shooter since 1994, shooting for a variety of different companies, and just love to shoot and compete.
Yeah, it's good to have you, dude. I've known you for a long time back. When did we meet? Was it when I was at Vudoo? Is when we met, or how long is it? It's been a while.
It's been about 3 years. I think the first, we've talked a bunch on the phone and stuff like that, but our first time actually meeting was at Utah at the NRL 22 championship, the very first year.
Right. That's correct. Yeah, that's been a year or two ago. So now you guys are both Vudoo shooters. The Vudoos were kind of what really brought a lot of this craze back, along with the NRL 22, of course. They were kind of what brought it back, and the Vudoo kind of changed everybody's, everybody thought the 22 was this thing that, you went out and shot squirrels with, and you just went out and planked with, and the whole concept and the idea behind the 22 has completely changed in the last few years. Now, being Vudoo shooters, what does that mean for you guys? Do you guys have like a little bit higher pedestal to stand on, or like explain to us kind of how you got to be Vudoo shooters, and then, how it's kind of progressed?
All right. Well, I'll start it off, I guess, since I was the first sponsored Vudoo shooter. Just like you said, nobody ever thought that we were going to send 22 rounds at, 300-400 yards and do it accurately. Prior to me getting involved with the long range 22 shooting, I've been competing in precision rifle since the early 90s, 3-gun and stuff like that. And I happened to be chasing my grandmaster in PCC for USPSA. And I started seeing a lot of talk about long range rimfire, and the stuff that I seen, guys were shooting at 100-yard on like silhouettes with scoring rings. I'm like, well, this is kind of weird and doesn't really interest me. But then started seeing it like follow the trends of the PRS and what was going on with the PRS. And I started reaching out to some people, and actually Craig Arson at 419 was very helpful and kind of steering me down the path. I had a lot of questions for him. And after us talking, I said, hey, what's your dream gun? What would you build for your a custom gun? And he's like, Vudoo. I'm like, Vudoo? Who's Vudoo? Vudoo Tactical, and he's like, no, Vudoo Gunworks. And he sent me a link, and I seen that positive feed control, and I was sold. A couple of days of doing some research, I picked up the phone, was ready to order a gun, and Mike Bush was on the phone, and we started talking, and he says, hey, I'm looking for some shooters, and I know who you are, and I want you to shoot for my company. Let me build you a gun. And here I am 3 years later, 90 matches in the 22 and just loving it.
Yeah. That's the biggest thing about Vudoo. Even when I worked there, they were always extremely happy to help, whether it was sponsorships, whether it was, attending events, whether it was trying to help somebody in need, whether it's a U shooter or something. Vudoo is always really good at that. What are your thoughts on that, John?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of joined in a less direct fashion. I first met Mike at the NRA World Shoot going on 3 years ago. We just kind of hit it off, and then I ran into him at SHOT Show 2 years ago, and I had been competing with a Ruger American for my first season, and unbeknownst to me, he had been following my progress and Stephen Ferguson's progress. And so he kind of offered for us to join the Vudoo team 2 years ago at SHOT Show. And then since hopping on with that, I mean, it's been shooting Vudoo for like 8-9 months, and it's just in a completely different league. Like, I liked my Ruger American. I still have it. It's my backup gun. But nothing compares to shooting like a precision built open class gun coming from production, which is what I came from. But like kind of like you alluded to at the beginning, it is a little bit of a higher pedestal. Like there aren't very many jerseyed shooters in 22. Like you'll see at PRS, like half the competitors are going to have jerseys on for somebody or another. At the NRL championships, there was us. There was one CZ guy that was in my squad, and the Bagheera guys, like 3 guys from Bagheera, and that was about it out of 100 competitors. So it is a little bit of a higher pedestal, but part of the thing that Mike has pushed with the Vudoo team is not only is our performance expected to be good, it's more just trying to get people into the sport. Like, he doesn't have anybody talking bad about other companies, other guns. It's all about building the sport, which, like you said, Vudoo's kind of pioneered, along with NRL, pioneered the whole 22 long-range precision game. And so it's been really nice working with a team that isn't so much like you're not allowed to go shoot other guns. You're allowed to do anything you want. And how can we support you in the matches and what the team needs to do without focusing so much on the marketing piece and making sure we look better than everybody else.
Right. And that's one big thing as a sponsor myself. I think that's one of the bigger things that people look into is the ambassador section of things. But you guys have been doing really good. I've been kind of watching, your guys' social media as well. You've got, you guys have been shooting a lot on the East Coast. So if you're on the East Coast listening, these guys, you'll probably see them around now. Like the War, is it War? What's up at Peacemaker? What's the 22 league up there? Is it still going?
That's the Loophole Rimfire series.
Okay, and you guys are both pretty deep into that. And then what are your other big matches you guys kind of attend up there?
So we got also over here on the East Coast, we have the Mid-Atlantic Rimfire series. I run a club out of my range locally here, but that's based out of Pennsylvania, one club out of West Virginia, a couple clubs out of Maryland, and we got about 30 matches just between all those clubs. So we're shooting probably 4 to 6 rimfires every month.
Wow, that's crazy. That's a lot of freaking rimfire.
Yeah.
Because then we've got to go into lot testing and all that kind of stuff, which is interesting. And that's one thing, and I'm not going to go down a rabbit hole, but these new barrel tuners, I'm interested to see what they're going to do for 22s, where you can tune your barrel without having to change a bunch of lots and stuff. I don't know if you guys have played with those yet, but that's one thing that I really want to play with here pretty soon. So you don't have to try and chase different lots of ammo and buy 10,000 rounds of the same thing, because we all know it isn't like it's cheap. That the 22 ammo is pretty freaking expensive.
So I know Tony's been messing with one.
Yeah, I've been messing with Aaron Hipp's tuner for a while now. I've had it on my Vudoo. And so what I've found so far is it definitely makes a difference in your accuracy. And I think it's bigger in the precision rifle with the center fires, because you could take on ammunition. If you say you want to shoot Hornady and it just doesn't shoot right and you're shooting a factory load, you can tune it right in. So far with the rimfire, I have seen small amounts of improvement. But being that I've already lot tested, and if I am shooting Lapua Center X, or I shoot a lot of Ely CMP, much cheaper bulk bag ammo, and it's shooting just as good as Center X for me. But you can tune it in a little bit, but I don't see as much of a gain so far in the 22 world as I have in the center fire.
Yeah, because I've got one of Aaron's. It's in here somewhere, but I've got one of them on my center fire, and I'm like, I just ordered a bunch of factory ammo for a couple of my guns, and I'm like, I want to run through this test and see if, instead of spending all your time in the reloading room, you're going to spend the time on the range just shooting, which is, definitely a big thing for me. So I guess one of the big things that I get asked a lot is, hey, I want to maybe start competing in the 22 stuff. I'm a little overwhelmed, and I think that's one of the cool things that the NRL did up front was they created more of like the base class for people to kind of come in, and they're not competing against the big Rolls Royce freaking Voodoos and Remexes and stuff. Can you guys kind of explain to maybe some of our listeners what that, how easy it is to really get involved with actually shooting 22?
So, yeah, I mean, like you said, with base class, the NRL has, it's a really good way to kind of get into the 22 game. But the one thing that I've noticed is a huge difference, and Tony can attest to this as well, because he's shot every type of discipline under the sun, is that everyone is a lot more willing to let you use their equipment with 22, especially their guns. It's not like a 6-dasher where their barrel life's 800 rounds, and if you shoot 100 of it, like, they're going to get all bent out of shape. Like, I'll let somebody shoot a whole match with my gun. It doesn't even matter. Shit, I'll give them the ammo. And with the 22 game, like, I tell people all the time, like, don't even worry about having a gun. Just come out. Somebody will give you their backup gun. Somebody will let you use theirs and hot gun in between stages. You're not dealing with barrels warming up and weird dope. And especially with NRL only going out to 100, your data's not going to be off that much shooter to shooter. It's not like, again, trying to shoot somebody's 6-dasher out at 1,200 yards where your eye relief's a little bit different than theirs, and it gets kind of wonky. But yeah, base class is a great way to get into it. Like I said, I started with a Ruger American that I picked up used at Green Top here in Virginia for like $370, and I threw a Diamondback Tactical on it. So I was running a $700 setup, like the entire setup, and was doing just as well as anybody else out there.
Yeah, going off what John said, it's been very huge over here in the East Coast for me. I've been turning a lot of new shooters on. Even at work, when I started my rimfire club at work, I had guys sneaking out buying new rifles so their wife didn't know, just so they could have their own rifle to play. And it's been huge. NRL 22 has really been huge for bringing women and children into the sport. John could attest. My club, I took over running the NRL 22 club at my place, and we had like 8 to 10 shooters, and last month we had 35, and people are knocking the door down. So it's growing. It's just giving everybody a platform, and think about all these small ranges around the country where you can't send center fires past 200 or 300 yards. We're now shooting rim fires, doing the same things they're doing in PRS, using the same props, same barricades, and having the same fun. And we're throwing cheaper ammo down range, and we're just all helping each other grow and get better.
Yeah, and that's the great thing. Like, my wife's got a Vudoo. We build it for her. Me and Paul and the guys at Vudoo build it for her when I still worked at Vudoo, and she was going to go start shooting. She hasn't yet, but she's actually started really bugging me lately about, hey, I want to actually go try this because it's not as scary. If you've got a match, if you've got a field style match like Mine Dog Valley, you've got targets out to 1,000 yards or more, and you've got to try and find them and engage them and do all that. Where the 22, usually you've got a lane and you kind of stay within it, and you're running off some simpler barricades and different things. And it really is less scary to a lot of people, for that kind of stuff. But I know, John, your wife's been shooting a lot lately too, hasn't she?
Yep. I got my wife into it about 3 months ago. I picked up a Magnum Research off a prize table at NRA Worlds last year. And so I picked it up for her to be able to build a rifle and use, just because it was easier to teach her on a semi than dealing with a bolt action. It's just one less step that I had to have her worry about during a match. And one thing she's really liked about the NRL 22 side is the monthly course of fire. So it comes out, she was a little bit intimidated going to a match, not knowing what was going to happen, especially trying to learn. She doesn't know what to practice. And then you show up to a match and they're like, hey, you're shooting a mover at 450 and you're shooting it off this thing you've never seen before. And it was just really intimidating. And so she wasn't very comfortable getting into PRS. And so NRL, now she can look at the course of fire. She can kind of game plan in her mind exactly what's going to happen prior to the match actually happening. And so she's really enjoyed that aspect of it. But for her, it was really just getting over the kind of hump of the first match. Like, she was really nervous her first match. I took her out to Mike Suttle to his match in West Virginia. And so him and Megan run the match, and they're also Vudoo shooters. And so it was nice for my wife to kind of be in the same squad as Megan and have another girl helping her out. And after that, she was hooked. She's shot, in the last 3 months, she's probably shot 10 to 11 matches.
Hell, that gets expensive after a while. Now you got to buy ammo for both of them. You got to pay travel for both of you. It's like, well, maybe I shouldn't have done this, but I guess it is technically cheaper than center fire, and it's only a 1-day match, so it isn't too crazy.
Yeah.
The X, I know the NRL 22X is going to change a lot of things with, shooting a little bit further, which I know a lot of people wanted to do, especially out west. We've got a lot more room to shoot, and everybody goes, well, I want to shoot, 300 yards, 400 yards, whatever it is. And that was one of the cool things when we did the first world record attempt up in Montana. My wife was actually one of the first ones to set one of the first world records, and it was, of course, beaten a little later, but she shot it on a borrowed Vudoo, and it was her very first match ever. And she beat half of it. She'll have to ask Paul and Mike and everybody about that because she beat all of us. So it was kind of funny. I'm like, well, maybe I shouldn't take her in any more matches because we got our freaking butts kicked by my wife that's never shot before. So it's one of the things. Women definitely have a lot calmer nerves when it goes into that stuff, which was funny. But it's just one of those things. You never would have seen it coming, but she did it. So that's why I needed to probably take her and get her kind of a little bit more involved in it. She's always keeps bugging me.
Well, look at our teammate, Alison Zane, 15-year-old girl, just dominating the country in center fire and rim fire. So it's always great to see her out at matches, and she's a great ambassador to the sport as well.
Yeah, and she won. She was at an NRL 22 months up in Ohio, right? She got like second place overall, first lady, first junior, like just was sweet.
Going into NRL X, so we shot the first X match on the East Coast this past Sunday. So I was up there in Ohio myself shooting, and Greg Stewart used Matt Steiner's facility at Southernton up there. And I tell you what, that had to be the hardest rimfire match I've ever shot in my life. It was brutal. The winds were rocking. We shot out the 400 yards. I would say we had, maybe 15 or 20% of the shots that were past like 200 yards. So it was definitely fun and challenging. So the X is going to bring a new dynamic to the sport for sure.
Yeah, I met her and Ashton Glasscock in Utah when we were here shooting this PRS match. And I'm like, it kind of makes me sad because I got my butt kicked by a freaking kid, but you know what? Good on them, because it just goes to show that anybody can come out and compete. There's a kid, and I can't remember his name, up in the Pacific Northwest that's been kicking everybody's butt. I mean, he's like top 20. I'm like, it just amazes me that, once the kids put their mind towards something, that they can kick freaking trash. And one thing that I wanted to ask you guys about, what do you guys think about the new PRS league? I know the PRS just released it. They're going to change some things. They're going to let match directors kind of run their own thing and not have necessarily a course of fire. What are the pros and cons in your guys' eyes for doing this? And I'll, of course, have Shannon on later to talk about kind of what his plan is, but I kind of wanted to get your guys' take on, is it going to change anything? Is it going to change a lot? What do you guys think?
I think it's going to add more places to shoot. I'm going to have to look at adding PRS matches to what we're doing here. I'm already running a combination NRL 22 and a Mars rimfire match. And, I can just as easily report the same scores to PRS. So, PRS has a much bigger, broader, grasp of the market, just like NRL has a huge piece. But if we can get more shooters involved and more places to shoot, I say, hey, let's do it. Let's shoot 22s every weekend.
Yeah, I noticed in one of the rules that Shannon noted that you could count it towards both if you wanted. I don't know if the NRL is going to allow that or not, but I noticed in his rule book that if you shot it for PRS points, you could share it. But I don't know how any of that's going to work yet, but that was just interesting to me. What were you going to say, John? Sorry.
I was going to say, I think it's going to mirror NRL X a fair amount, because that's kind of how X is set up, that the match directors get to design the course of fire and everything. And for those people that have been in areas that have only had the NRL series up to this point, I think it's going to be a huge difference, a very good difference. Getting kind of a little bit more challenging or a little bit more creative stages, pushing out a little bit to build your confidence in the consistency that a 22 has out at those ranges. We've been a little bit spoiled on the East Coast. Within 2 hours of me, I've got 4 series. So we've got the Mid-Atlantic series, you've got the Lapua series at Peacemaker, you've got the Frontline didn't do a series this year. But there's another complex that was running their own series last year. And the Mid-Atlantic, Lapua, and Frontline had been pushing out to 300 plus yards since the beginning, since they've been started with the 22 game. And so for us, the NRL 22X and the PRS, it's going to be kind of more of the same, which, like Tony said, that's great. I'm I have no complaints going to shoot 22 every weekend and just leaving my center fire in the safe and leaving my pistols in the safe. I don't care. But I think for those people that have had ranges that they've only been running the monthly course of fire, it's going to be a really great experience to kind of stretch their legs a bit and see how consistent their rig is at 300 and 400 yards.
Yeah, and everybody thought this was a pea shooter, can shooter thing. You shoot 50 yards and that was it. But, this has completely changed everything about rimfire. And that's one of the coolest things I think about watching all of it from the outside looking in is how much it's grown and how much it's changed people's perspective on things. One of the big things that I wanted to talk to you both about now, you both recently competed in the NRL 22 championships. They were in Tennessee this year, correct?
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how many shooters were there?
What did we get to? I think 105, 110, something.
100. And that's a pretty dang good turnout. So I kind of wanted to discuss, what you guys did to train to go into this. And I guess first off, was it an invite thing? Was it you had to hit so many scores? How were you invited to go to the championships?
You want to start, John, or you want me to
So
go?
Tony, I was going to say you might have more insight because you're a match director.
So originally when it was set for 3 years ago, you were supposed to have regional qualifiers. They didn't kind of run that format because it was just taking off and growing. So the last couple of years, they gave spots out by participation to a club. So if you had 40 or 50 shooters, each club would be awarded X amount of spots. I really felt bad for Michael this year because COVID came in. The match was supposed to be in May, and he had to keep postponing it. And, it was looking like a big fight to get into it. And then people's plans kind of changed. But you definitely got to shoot your monthly matches, get some scores on the board. And then it comes down to those match directors giving out the spots. But I think with the COVID, it opened it up for some shooters to get in that probably weren't originally planning on it.
Yeah, I noticed that it was pushed off. And then, they changed the actual NRL seasons. Now it ends in like June or something, which is good. That was one of the hard problems before. It ended in like October, November, and then you had to wait till like February to shoot again, and that kind of messed you up a little bit. So that was good. So I guess going into it, did you guys get the course of fire like you do in the standard ones, or did you go into it completely blind?
Nope. We got the course of fire, 2 days before it was when they officially released it, I think. 2 days. But it wasn't part of the monthly course of fire. They ran it kind of like you're going to see in the NRL 22X matches where everything goes. I think the only piece of equipment that was banned was tripods, and except for one stage. One stage had a stage tripod that you could use. Other than that, the equipment was unlimited. How you wanted to engage it was unlimited. And then the ranges was out to what was the furthest one? 370?
370. There was that deer target out there.
Yeah, 370. So it wasn't your standard monthly course of fire at all.
So that makes it a lot more interesting. So where you've got, most of you are going to be traveling the day before. So you really only get a day to really look over it and figure it out and, get all your stuff dialed in, which is cool. Now, was it mostly the same props as the NRL? Was it like the ladders? Was it the buckets? Was it that kind of stuff? Or was it all completely different? Was it more of like a PRS style match?
We did see a couple of the standard monthly props on one or two of the stages, but it pretty much was like a normal PRS match. Michael was allowed to design whatever he wanted and throw whatever twists in it, and he had some pretty neat little stages in there for us to shoot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I kind of heard, I saw some things like some memes in some groups and stuff about the PRS series coming out, where, oh, look, no more freaking offhand, off ladder BS, blah, blah, blah. What are your guys' take on that kind of stuff? Now, I understand it makes it easier because a lot of the match directors have a ladder, or they have this, which makes it really easy across the board. But as a match director, I guess, Tony, what would you say? Is that something that you're kind of like, all right, that can be done now, we need to move on? Or what do you think?
Well, it's funny because, I know some guys that these monthly courses of fire come out and they practice them every single day. They're telling me they shoot 10s every single day, and then all of a sudden they come to the match and they're bombing those stages. So I think the pressure of match day definitely changes the things for you. But I also think as a new club or a small club or really bringing new shooters into the fold, it gives you some standard props that most people probably have at their house that they can start learning to get off their belly and actually shoot with. So I think that's what's kind of important about having those small other props.
I got you. Go ahead.
I was going to say, the one nice thing too about having the props that kind of are consistent month to month is for the people that don't have property that they can go shoot on or practice on a weekly basis. The one issue you run into with PRS, especially when you're a new shooter, is every match that you're spending match fees, travel, ammo, hotels, all that. And then you go up there and you're shooting something you've never shot on. And so you almost ended up wasting all that money you spent because you've never had experience shooting that. And so the one nice thing about the standardized course of fire is you get to see it beforehand, but like, you know that you're going to shoot off a bucket and a ladder and a tank trap and whatnot. And so you kind of can actually practice and learn and then progress and then get introduced to some of that other stuff, instead of like every match is just the match director's wet dream where he just went high and right and you're just the poor guy that's never seen any of it before. And it's just a crapshoot.
Yeah, and that's one of the big things, I guess, about the NRL 22 is it brings a lot of new shooters in where, you know, the big 2-day PRS matches don't. I've noticed that a lot more about the 1-day, like standard matches. They bring a lot more newer shooters in because it's just not as overwhelming. So, you know, that's pretty good kudos on the NRL for, you know, thinking through that. I know that was Tyler and Travis's brainchild, which was great. And I think the progression of it really goes towards the NRL 22X, where it's like, okay, now we've kind of done the baby thing. Mm-hmm. Y'all figured it out. Now let's, you know, move along. I think, you know, with the PRS opening, it's going to, you know, breed some new things to come along. And I'm kind of excited to see this. You know, I'm thinking like, heck, you know, instead of spending so much time in the reloading room getting all my centerfire stuff done, maybe I just go buy a whole bunch of 22 ammo and just go start shooting, because I've got an entire 22 range set up now that we actually built so we could start doing it. I just got to freaking quit making excuses and go do it. That's, you know, one of those things. We've all got plenty of stuff to do and plenty of excuses not to go do it. Yeah. So let's start off with this, Tony. We'll go to Tony and then to John. When you you know, like let's say a month out, you're going to the Nationals. What was your game plan going into the Nationals? And what was your, you know, what were you practicing the most of?
Well, I was hoping that I was even going to get to go to Nationals. I didn't know until Thursday before the match that I was going to be able to go. So it was quite a battle to get there. So I'm happy to get there and get to shoot the match. Being that I'm shooting every single weekend or every month, 4 to 6 matches, I'm getting plenty of training time. So I wasn't really focused on doing anything out of the norm. I just wanted to make sure I had a good zero, ran a chronograph, had good velocity, trued up my data, checked my data to real world conditions, and plotting that in my data book so I can reference it at the match. And after that, hey, whatever you're going to throw at me, I'm going to be ready for it, because if not, then I'm screwed.
Yeah, that's one of those things. And we just did get asked by Ruth, and this kind of hits your point. How do you guys prep for the 22X or other big matches when the course fires are predetermined? So you kind of hit on that, you know, briefly. Johnathon, what was your plan going into it? What were you going to practice?
So I had a little bit more notice than Tony. I had not been planning this since last year. I found out about a month beforehand that I was actually going to be able to commit and do it, and signed up and registered for it. And kind of like Tony, I'd been shooting matches more or less every weekend since COVID, or since the matches started popping up after COVID. And I almost didn't make it to Nationals. So the Sunday before Nationals, my appendix almost burst. So I was actually in surgery the Sunday before Nationals, and then telling the surgeon I was going to drive in 3 days to Tennessee. So that made it an interesting experience. But the biggest thing going into it and kind of going into the 22X stuff for prep is just making sure your data's good. I would go to the range and just double check, like Tony, double check my zero, double check my data as far out as I could. And your long range data is the biggest thing. And that was one thing they did really well for the 22X, because it is kind of pushing the limits. Like a 22 at 370 is the equivalent of a 308 shooting past 1,000. in both drop and win calls. And so what they did on the Friday beforehand, when everybody checked in, was they had targets set up that we could go shoot and confirm data. Because the biggest thing was I was coming from Virginia, going to Tennessee. I mean, I think one way it was about 500 miles. So my data had absolutely changed. And I probably spent 2 hours at the range correcting my ballistic calculator because it just wasn't lining up with the new atmospherics in the new location. And so that was really nice that I was able to go out the day before and kind of confirm my data and fix everything, because match day would have been an absolute cluster for me if I hadn't had the opportunity to do that.
So I guess this is a question, and I've got to do it a lot more with when I start shooting. How much difference is there in like your data in 22 than centerfire? And what I mean by that is, in centerfire, we're constantly throughout the day updating everything. Now, is that something that you guys do constantly, or you're getting your DA or however you guys are doing it constantly throughout the day, or does your stuff stay pretty true throughout the day?
So for me, I'm still going old school. I'm not a fan of running my ballistics off the Kestrel. I've just seen too many shooters click one tab, one button, and next thing you know, they're shooting and screwing up and bombing a stage. With me, I collect real world data. I'm out all the time shooting. I've built my own custom charts at 50, 60, 70, and I'm kind of seeing patterns with my data. And actually at championship, I ran my 70-degree chart here from the East Coast. I had like 5 different charts, and when I practiced on the practice day, I shot it all out there and I started comparing numbers and kind of truing up what I wanted to do. And my 70-degree chart was what was working, and that's what I ran there.
So
that's interesting. What about you?
Yeah, so I kind of do the same thing as Tony. I don't even own a Kestrel. I just use the Applied Ballistics app on my smartphone. I update the atmospherics once, and if there's a huge weather change, I'll update it again. But other than that, I don't mess with it. One of my biggest pet peeves, especially at PRS matches, is you go to every stage, and every single stage, you see a line of people out there spinning their Kestrels around trying to update the humidity. And they're constantly messing with their charts, and they're constantly messing with everything else instead of prepping for the stage. And so you'll see those people, and sure, their data might be good, but then they time out because they didn't practice how they were going to set up their tripod, or they didn't practice what position they were going to go to first, or all the other stage planning, and you're not going to see that big of a shift. But it's big enough that when you change locations, you need to confirm it. About halfway through the season, I had a 2 mil shift in my data at 400 yards. So it actually happened in the middle of a match. I was able to catch it and correct it fast enough. So you need to be on top of your data, but you don't need to be like updating it every time the sun comes out. It's just not, even in centerfire, it's just not necessary, and people obsess with it way too much. And to answer Ruth's question, I did not change it between Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, which might be why I bombed at the last stage, but we'll see.
We can't hear you, Cole.
Sorry, push the button. Did you change your stuff at all, or did you leave it all weekend?
For me, I end up running my same chart. Like I said, I run a 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and I had a 100-degree chart. And pretty much all this year, my 50 and 70-degree chart has been working. Like my 50's been working pretty good out to about 70 degrees. And then I've been switching over from 70 to 100, running my 70 degrees chart. And people are laughing because I've been using the same chart since March. And I've been, doing well in the Lapua series. I'm doing well in the Mars series. And I'm finding a 1/10 of a mil difference at some of these yard lines. But the other thing you got to think about, especially with the NRL style targets and this rimfire stuff, the targets are pretty generous. If they were pretty smaller size targets at those bigger, further distances, I might have to really tweak it a little bit more. But I'm finding that accuracy enough, shooting that same ammo all the time, and really being in tune with my gun and my ammo combination, that I've been pretty good. So very rarely have I been having a bad stage. Like I think the Lapua match we shot a couple weeks ago with John, for some reason I was off at distance. I was like 2 or 3 tenths off, and it cost me pretty bad on a stage. And then after I figured it out, I was back on track. So it just seems like it's the trends, and it's tracking about pretty realistic for me.
That's funny. 2 or 3/10 of 22 is quite a bit.
Yeah.
That's a lot. Talking about wind or drift or whatever. But so I guess let's kind of break down the match a little bit and what you guys got in there. Now, was it a lot harder than your average, NRL 22 match? Was it on par with it? What kind of are your takeaways from doing it? We'll start with you, G.
It had some challenging aspects, but I think, the match directors have to take in mind, you got a lot of kids, you got females, you got shooters that are going to their first major match. So they try to give a pretty good balance. I didn't think there was anything that was too crazy for us to do. I think Mike just gave us enough rope to hang ourselves. If you didn't make the shots, you were just going to screw yourself all weekend.
What about you, John?
Yeah, so I agree with Tony. It was definitely more challenging than the standard monthly course of fire. Like we talked about, it went out a lot further in distance. Furthest target was like 370. A lot different positions, different barricades. The paper stages, there was, I think, 4 paper stages that were a lot more difficult than your standard monthly paper stages. And I think a lot of it comes down to what squad. So it's kind of like I mentioned earlier. Everyone in 22, compared to the other sports I've shot, is a lot more helpful and friendly with getting everybody kind of on the same page. And that's one of the things we, with Vudoo, kind of push. And so I know for my squad, I was one of 2 sponsored shooters that were in my squad. And it was all about kind of helping the new guys. So like there was one of the stages that I didn't do too hot on, was the movers stage. And over half my squad had never shot that before. And so like just within the match, if you go to a PRS match, again, depending on the squad, you're going to have those guys that are really confident with movers are just going to disappear. They're going to go off, take care of their data, knowing not to take this stage and let everybody else kind of suffer behind and be like, this is the one that's going to make me out on top, at least in my squad. And with the 22 stuff, it wasn't like that at all. We literally all came together. I asked who had shot movers before, who didn't know what they were doing and needed help. And we talked about how we were going to come up with the lead. 3 of us measured the speed of the target, and we kind of collaborated as a squad to make sure that as a group, we were going to be successful, because it's not fun and it's not fair for guys that have never shot a mover before because they don't have the experience or the resources to show up at a championship match. And then I'm just sitting here like, I've got them. Like it just doesn't help the sport at all. So that was challenging, but it was nice to be able to help other shooters kind of grasp new concepts and new targets that they hadn't seen before.
Right, and that was one of my big things. Like here, we shot the PRS match George Gardner put on, and I was shooting a 308 going with the speed of smell, and Shannon Kay was in my squad, and we got talking about it, and I'm like, dude, I haven't shot this forever. I can't remember how to do it. And he broke it down for me. He's like, dial this in. Let's figure it out, blah, blah, blah. And that's kind of what makes it fun, because when you go into a stage and you completely freaking bomb it, it's not fun anymore. And that was one of the other cool things about the NRL 22 is, the openness to really help new shooters and people get, really into it. I'm a little scared because frickin' Mike's really close to me. He's in Colorado. Somebody let him out of his frickin' corner of the U.S. up there. I don't know who that was, but we should have probably had Mike and everybody on here too. Hell, we could have probably fit all the team Vudoo. I don't know. You guys got a pretty big team now. I don't think we could have fit everybody on here, but
I think we're up to 10 or 11.
Yeah, we can only go to 6, so we'd be screwed. But we could get, people on and off, and we'd have a good time. But so let's go into the match itself. Tony, what was your favorite stage? Why and how did you attack the stage?
I think my favorite stage was Rifle Uno. It was a fun, like, kind of one of those gamey circus stages that's fun. It was basically had some Uno cards and you grabbed them, and if you pulled a blue 6, you had to shoot the blue target 6 times. Well, on that, it was like a KYL rack, and some of the targets spun forever. So like yellow and green, if you pulled them, you were in trouble because you whacked them at around like 50 yards and you hit it. That thing was spinning for 10 or 15 seconds and you had to get your 10 shots off of it. So it was kind of challenging to see what you were going to pull and what you're going to get. And there was some stress involved in it, because if you hit that yellow or that green, you pulled another one. I know a couple of people, I think Mike Suttle was one of the guys who got kind of screwed over. You grabbed a double green and he had to waste a lot of time. So there was some bad luck involved in it, but it was fun. And enough stress to make you really work. And if you blew a shot, you were really screwed. So I thought that was kind of fun, circus type stage. That was fun.
What about you, John?
I think my favorite stage was one they called the Crack House, and so they had it was just a 9-window board that was set up with just like plywood and a tarp like shoved over top of it. But what I liked about the stage was you could only use staged equipment. So they had a tripod with a hog saddle and then like 4 different bags that you could pick from to use, but you weren't allowed to use any of your own equipment for the stage. And then they had it set up so that you had 2 targets you had to engage. You're shooting at each target from each port, and you had to shoot out of 5 ports minimum. So there's a lot of position changes in that stage. But the 2 targets were set probably about 300 yards apart. One was like from the barricade, like looking out straight to the left, and the other one you have to traverse all the way across the field to the right side. So one, your wind's changed for each target. For us, when I shot it, the wind was pretty calm, and I was still having to hold left edge on one target and center on the other. And so it was just kind of an interesting setup for the stage, because you couldn't, like, people that had the rail game changers couldn't use those. You had to use one of the bags. And I'm that guy that only ever uses one bag anyway. But it was forcing you into weird positions. And this thing was set up like a crack house. Like, it was just like crappy plywood built over. I would have loved to see Tony shoot it, because I'm sure it almost collapsed when he was hitting the walls, because you'd be like in a standing port that's shoved all the way over next to this piece of plywood. And so you shoot the left target, and then you're like cringing over to try and get eye relief to shoot the other target, because there's just no room for you to get to. And I thought it was fun just because it was challenging, and I cleaned it. So, you know, it always makes me feel better. But it was just a challenging stage, and you have to use staged equipment. I'm a huge fan of staged equipment. I don't know. It's just one of those weird things that I like that everybody else hates.
It changes things up, and it kind of takes some things out of your comfort level, which, you know, you get really comfortable using the same thing over and over. Or I guess those guys that bring everything in the kitchen sink with them, that it kind of messes with them big time too. It's like, shit, I don't even know how to use that, or I've never used that before. So it kind of changes some things up. I like those stages a little bit. I try to implement them in my match a little bit. But then guys get pissed off because they're like, well, this isn't what I use. I don't want to use it, blah, blah, blah. So it's interesting to kind of, you know, change it up a little bit, I guess. What was your worst stage, and what would you have done differently, Tony?
Well, paper this year killed me. So going back to what I should have practiced more before I went out there, NRL 22 got rid of paper stages for the rest of this year. And so I was like, okay, maybe we won't see any paper. We had a positional stage, and we shot 2 rounds standing, 2 rounds kneeling, 3 rounds sitting, and then it was 4 rounds prone. And paper killed me. The top shooter, Chris Simmons, he was end of day 1. He probably averaged 160 points on the 2 paper stages we had, and Tony had a total of 88 points out of 2 stages. So probably the average in that match, I think most average shooters were pulling about 140, 135-ish points. So I gave up about 40 points on the average, and I gave 7-8 shots or 70 or 80 points in the whole match to the top shooters. So that killed me on day 1. And, you know, I had a great day 2, but you ain't coming back if you're giving up that many points to such great shooters that we have around the country. Right.
It's hard. Once you lose a couple points, it's almost impossible to gain them back. You know what I mean? It's kind of like golf, but you lose them, you're like, shit, well, at least I've got to not miss any more to try and stay on the top. Then it gets in your head a little bit. What about you, John?
So I had 2 worst stages, and they're my worst stages because I did worst on them. First one was the movers. Like I said, we kind of collaborated as a squad. I had a bunch of guys going ahead of me, and like, we had new guys never shot movers before clean the stage or get 8 out of 10. It was kind of exciting to see that. And then I get up for my turn, and I lost my mind when the buzzer went off. It's the mind eraser. It's what it does. I started putting my lead edge. I figured out the next day what I did wrong. I put my lead edge instead of off center, and I got a whopping 2 out of 10 points on that stage. And then my last stage of the day was the Loophole Stage. And for some reason, my data was off. I was shooting over top of the target by about 1 mil. I still haven't figured that one out yet. But that was just my worst stage, just just due to circumstance, not because the stage was set up poorly or anything. Just kind of how it went.
Interesting. And that's kind of the fun thing. You always ask, the top shooters, how did you go into a stage? What were you thinking about? How did you prep for it? And then what would you have changed, going into it? I think that's kind of cool to ask shooters because, I've been shooting for a while and I'm nowhere near the top. I hang out with the guys that get hats on the table. That's just because I don't practice. I don't do any of that. And that's my own fault. But it's kind of interesting to see how people attack different things, and that's fun. Bruce got a question. Did you struggle with the Yeti mover or the Rubik's Cube mover?
Yeti.
What was the Yeti mover again?
So the Yeti mover, I'm not sure the brand of the mover target. You probably
DM targets.
DM targets.
Okay.
So it had a small Yeti on the bottom and then a large Yeti on top, and you had to hit the small Yeti on the bottom to be able to shoot at the top one. So if you kept missing the small one, you had to keep engaging until you hit it. And then once you went to the large one, you got one shot on the large one. That was it, and you had to go back. The Rubik's Cube mover was just again, I'm not sure who makes it. Do you know, Tony?
No, actually, it looked like almost like a Caldwell type mover, and I guess the gentleman fabricated it up, made it up with his own modification. So it was kind of a Frankenstein mover, but it was fun.
It was like the old school carnivals with the ducks where they're just like on a loop that goes over and they get reset. So it was kind of like that, but it was just little circles. And so they had one of those going, and it was at 50 yards, and we had to shoot it off of a bunch of tiered colored steps. And then you had like 3 Rubik's Cubes you rolled, and then whatever colors you rolled, you have to shoot off those colored steps. And so that one was pretty cool. But the lead for that one was easy. I mean, you were just doing lead edge. And any missed shots on that one were pretty much all due to stability or jerking the trigger. I think I got a 9 out of 12 on that. And it was like straight up, I knew those shots weren't going to hit as soon as I finished pressing the trigger. Like I just jerked it or rushed it or did something. But the Yeti mover was definitely more difficult because that one was out at range.
Yeah, Megan asked, how did you guys use your Mulligan chips? Now that's one of those things that I've thought about using in my match, but at the same time, it's like, do you give somebody another chance to do something? I don't know. But the thing is I've seen a lot of shooters take the Mulligan and then they get a lot worse. And they're like, shit, I wish I would have never used that. So it's a gamble. But how did you guys use it?
So it's funny that Megan asked it. Last year, Megan took her Mulligan home, and this year, Mike Suttle took his home. And there was a couple times I think he should have used his to save his bacon. He had a good stage, but he probably could have got some easy points out of it. I ended up using mine on the third stage of the match, and I really wanted to cry when I had to pull it out of my pocket. But our other teammate, Chris Simmons, he went ahead and he fired at the first target at 100 yards and missed it. And when he missed, he was the first shooter out the gate, and he missed it. I'm like, oh, this is not good. And then he went back and he cleaned it. He got off the stage, and he was sweating bullets. And then I was like the 4th shooter on the stage, and I missed a 125-yard target. And I was like, there is no way I just missed that big meatball target. And I had no choice. I had a 1 on the stage, and it's like, well, the whole match is done for the weekend if I don't pull this out and use it now. And I got a little taste of what Chris had to go through. I'm like, here we go. We're using it. Am I going to make that shot? I took like a 10th off my data, and I cleaned the stage. But I tell you what, I got off. I was sweating bullets, and I wish I had it a little deeper into the weekend because I probably would have used it definitely on the paper stage.
It's always one of those things. You're like, do I use it? Do I not use it? Roll the dice. What did you do, John?
So I ended up using mine on day 2. I was able to get out of day 1 without having to use it. And some backstory on the stage Tony used it on. So that was a try your limit stage. So it was a 8 target stage, and each target was worth like 16 points. But as soon as you missed, like that was it. You don't zero out. You just get the points you hit, but you don't get a chance to get the rest of them. So when you were missing the first and second target, like you weren't dropping 10 points, you were dropping 70 points or 80 or 100 points, like the entire stage. And so that, I think the RO for that stage said he collected like 23 or 21 Mulligan chips that day. Like almost a quarter of the competitors used it on one stage on day 1. So I ended up using mine on my first stage on day 2, which was the Ladder to Heaven. And so they essentially had stairs built out of railroad ties, and you had to shoot at 2 targets off of each railroad tie. And the difficulty was you're literally climbing up into the air as you're going. The last step was probably 10 feet into the air. So you're up on the second to last step at 8 feet. And you're climbing up, and then some steps, they're not even. So like one of them, you had to like, I ditched my bag at one point because it was too high. I couldn't see through the railroad tie. So to get low enough, I had to go straight, just rail on the step below it. And I ended up with, I think, a 4 out of 12 on that stage. And so I ended up reshooting it, and I think I got a 10 out of 12 on the next one. And I know that stage took a lot of people's mulligan chips as well, but the mulligan definitely adds like a level of, I think Megan said stress. I would say it's strategy to a match. So my first experience with mulligan chips was at the NRA World Shoot, and that's actually where I learned how dangerous they can be. So my first year at Worlds, they had the mulligan chips, and I watched a guy that was in second place. I think he was in second or third place, use it on the last stage. And it was like, I think it was the DMR stage. So for those of you not familiar with NRA Worlds, each stage is its own discipline of shooting. So you've got like cowboy action and bullseye and PRS and DMR and 3-gun and 2-gun and USPSA and all this stuff. And his last stage was the DMR. So it was an AR-10. I think that year was shooting 6.5 Creedmoor. And he got like an 8, I think it was an 8 out of 12 or something. And he finishes it. That was his last stage, still had his mulligan chip. And he's like, I can do it faster, and did it slower with less hits and dropped. And I mean, that cost him, I think it cost him $5,000 because that's a cash prize table. And so like I saw that, I don't think I was in like 50th place that year. And just like hearing that happened has always made me wary of when to use my mulligan chip. And so my personal theory with mulligan chips is you only use it if you bomb a stage. If you do like just a little bit good on a stage, don't use it. It's not worth it. Like you're not going to do better because you're going to try and shoot it faster. Because even though in NRL, like it's not time based, we all still kind of make it time based. Like, I mean, me and Tony have done it at matches where we're like, oh yeah, we both cleaned it. But how fast did you clean it? It doesn't matter. Like we had 2 minutes, but it's always like in the back of our mind that we need to do it faster than everybody else. And so I think that's like part of the risk with mulligans is you end up trying to do it so much better than the first time that you did it that you just end up bombing it, especially when you don't have makeup shots. It's not like 3-gun where you end up going through half your mag instead of a quarter of your mag. Like, yeah, you lost a couple seconds, but it's not detrimental. Where with NRL, you miss 3 shots, like 30 points is absolutely detrimental. I think at the last match at Tony's that I ended up winning, we were separated by 5 points.
It was no, you beat me straight up on time. You shot, I was taking my time just shooting it to get my hits and go clean, and you shot it faster, and I didn't even know you were on my heels, but you literally beat me because you shot the stage faster by like 5 or 8 seconds faster than me.
Yeah. And that was actually the second match in a row I'd won because of a tiebreaker with time. But yeah, I think that's the risk to mulligans is we end up using it on a stage we shouldn't have.
Well, there were people that got burned by using their mulligans too. They shot an 8 on a stage where it was out of 12 points, and they're like, "Oh, I can pick up those points easily," and they end up taking a 6. So now it really hurt. You used your mulligan, and there's definitely a strategy involved in it. Like John said, stage 3 was a good one to use it on. If you screwed up, that was a moneymaker. But like you got an 8 or a 10 shot stage, and you only drop 1 or 2 points, unless it's the last stage and you needed that to win, I wouldn't be reshooting it. I'm always looking at, hey, you bomb that stage like John said, or hey, it's a 12-point stage and you only got 50% of the points. Well, you're screwed. You're not going to be able to finish at the top. You're going to have to pull it out and save yourself right now and then hope you go clean the rest of the match. But I definitely like to have that in my back pocket and take it home and know that I shot a clean match or a pretty solid match and never have to use it because I could picture Mike Suttle's face right now. There was a couple times he was biting his tongue in his cheek and he was reaching in that pocket deep to pull it out. And then he said, I'll save it for later. But I think he should have used it on Uno, Mike.
Yeah. So did you guys buy them? Were they given to you? How did they work?
They were bought.
How much were they for a mulligan?
$20.
$20. Yeah.
You can only have one.
Yep,
Only
just
have one. And I think they use that money to take care of the ROs or,
Yeah.
whatever they did it with. I think the first match we seen it at was Vegas. I think they used that for the ROs or whatever. But I think either way, the money went to a good cause, and it did give a new aspect to the game. You would think that it would screw things up or whatever, but think back at all the matches you shot. There's always that, man, if I had that one shot back or that one stage, if I didn't screw that one stage, I could have won the match. So I think having it makes it nice to have, but I don't want that security blanket because I don't want to have to use the damn thing.
Yeah, that's just one of those things. You're like, all right, I screwed up, or it's kind of bad almost to have it in your back pocket because you're like, oh, I know I can bail myself out if I screw this up. So I guess I can see where it is completely in your mind. What are you gonna say, John?
I was gonna say it's almost a bragging rights piece too, especially on the negative aspect for those of us that like to shit talk everybody, is when you watch that guy that's like, oh, I got a 10 out of 12, I can clean it, and then gets an 8, and then you're just like, ooh, I get double shit talking now because not only did he use his mulligan, but he bombed it even worse. But the one nice thing about the mulligan too is for newer shooters. I don't think I saw anybody at the match that didn't buy one, and some of the newer shooters got to use it like for just dumb little mistakes. One of the guys used it because he forgot that he was dialed in for the previous stage. He started shooting at a 100-yard stage with this 300-yard dope on. And it took him, I think, 4 or 5 shots to realize it. Would have cost him 50 or 60 points, which is hugely detrimental in the precision game. And he was able to use his mulligan to be like, okay, I'm an idiot. Shouldn't have done that. Should have been paying attention. Round 2, and didn't make the mistake for the rest of the match. So it's not going to bring anybody that's a amateur shooter and put them at the pro level, but it does kind of help you make up for those like one-off mistakes that you just weren't paying attention.
That was one of the first times that I ever learned the hard mistake was at the Vortex Extreme one year. I dialed for like an 800-yard shot and I went to the next stage and I shot nothing. I'm like, where the hell? Yeah, I was shooting all the way over the freaking hill because I didn't realize I'd still dialed it in for that far. It's like if you haven't screwed that up, you haven't shot long enough. We've all learned that, but we did a podcast a while back on it. Like, what are some of the things you kind of program into your head going into a stage? And maybe some of you should listen to it. We are on Spotify, iTunes, all those. So go give them a listen. Go follow us because we're always wanting more people to listen and then give us ideas for podcast episodes. I guess it's a great time to plug it in. Next week, we're going to have Josh Clough from HS Precision come on the show. HS has kind of done a lot of cool things lately, and we want to kind of help them get it out, a new stock, new barrels, and all sorts of new cool stuff that they've come out with, and we're going to talk about that. But is there anything else that you two kind of, want to let people know about, the 22 scene, especially, a lot of the newer shooters that are still trying to kick the bucket, I guess, and try to get into it and see if it's really what they want to do? What do you guys recommend? And how do you get involved?
Go do it. Come find a club near you. As John has already said, I mean, we're always at matches. We're always loaning gear. We're always helping people. Don't be afraid to show up there. Everybody was new the first time. Being all the different sports that I like to shoot, I'm having more fun shooting 22 long rifle, precision rifle than anything else. Like I almost don't even want to go back to shoot PRS centerfire matches. I barely shot any USPSA this year. Very little 3-gun. I'm having more fun in this sport. New shooters, kids, women, adults that never thought they can shoot, past, 25 yards, hitting squirrels in their backyard or coming out, utilizing props and barricades, moving. I'm having the most fun with my Vudoo and coming out there and show up with a 10-22. Come out with anything you got. See if you like the game. And once you figure it out, go down that road and spend your money and buy some of these products that are going to help you out. But if you're not doing it, you're missing out.
Yeah, and kind of just to caveat off that, or to go with that, biggest thing is just come out. Like we've both been saying, I have an extra gun with me every time. Tony's got extra guns with him every time. Like everybody that upgrades always has an extra gun in their car. It's a 22. They've got an infinite barrel life. It doesn't matter. The ammo's cheap. That CMP Ely that now both me and Tony are shooting is like, it comes out to like $350 a box. I'll give you 2 boxes. I don't care. If it gets you into the sport, $6 or $7 is 100% worth my time and investment to get a new shooter into the sport. Don't worry about buying bags or knee pads or any of that stuff. Everybody's got loaner gear or be willing to let you use their gear. Biggest thing is just come out, have a good time, watch, and be open to learn. That's it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I guess for everybody listening, where is the best place to get the ammo so that maybe they can go practice on their own?
If you're looking into match ammo, you might have to do a little bit of searching. The CMP Ely stuff is only available on the CMP's website, and you have to be a member of a CMP affiliated club. So any of your Isaac Walton leagues, most gun clubs are affiliated members. Other than that, you're not really going to find your match grade 22 at your local gun shop. I know there's a couple websites that do testing lots. Tony, do you know what website that is?
I know you can go to Loophole Test Center. Ely's also got the test center. You can do that as well and get it tested out. Add into the ammo, just a tidbit. Everybody gets so wrapped up around, I have to have this lot tested ammo and the best ammo. Being that I shot a lot of 22 bench rest, I had a can of like test ammo that I run through every gun. And when my Vudoo came, I spent days out there testing ammo. And I'll be honest with you, 90% of the ammo that's on the market, all 10-shot groups at 50 were all 0.4s, 0.5s. And I try to tell people, just go out and shoot. If your gun at 50 yards could hold 3/4 of an inch at 50 yards, if you can hold 1.25 inches or less at 100 yards, 3 inches at 200, and 6 inches or less at 300, I don't care what ammo you got, you're going to be competitive in this sport. You don't have to spend days and months testing all this ammo and buying all this stuff that you're never going to use. If you keep those accuracy parameters in mind, the targets are going to eat up some of that air and some of those flyers, and just go out there, shoot, have fun, learn to win, and quit wasting time with ammo. But, there's a lot of ammo out there that's going to work just the same.
Yeah, it's kind of like center fire. Like, people get so wrapped around putting up their perfect groups with low SDs at 50 or 100 yards or whatever, and they forget about the practice. Like, I think it was the last Lapur match we were at. They had an offhand standing shot at like 62 yards on an 8-inch plate. It was literally a borderline 16 MOA target, and people were worried about it. And it's like, you could literally be shooting Remington Thunderbolt out of a 10-22 that's been rusty since the 80s. And if you're a halfway decent shooter, you're going to hit a 16 MOA target at 62 yards. Like, it's massive. And people just get really wrapped up in like, oh, but my ammo is shooting 2 SD at whatever, like your 6 Dasher guys. What's that meme that American Rifle series has been putting out? All the Dasher guys are talking about their 0.2 groups and 2 SDs and then timing out on the stage. It's kind of similar. Like, you want match ammo, but you don't need to go high and right and get the tightest group. It just needs to be not Remington Thunderbolt.
Must be BS, because I got a lot of that. The hell? Yeah, so up on the screen, I know you guys listening on the actual podcast aren't going to be able to see this, but NRL22.org, you can get a lot more information here. You can join the NRL 22X. You can get league information. The cool thing is you can set up a profile, compare stats, do all that stuff, which is really cool. The NRL is invested in this so heavily. Vudoo, of course, is right here front and center. Bergara, Bushnell. There's a lot of great sponsors that are really getting involved in this, and I'm excited to see where this is going to go. Even in the last couple of years, how much it's grown, and now with PRS coming into it and everything else, I can just see where this is going to go. But this is the best place to go learn, upfront, NRL22.org, and, get involved. That's the biggest thing. Is it's like everybody is, sees so much negativity, and it's cool to see, the kids shooting and the women shooting and people getting involved, and, go follow it and see if it's really what, is good for you. But I think it is. And I'm glad you two came on. I appreciate it. I appreciate the inputs you've given. Hopefully, this will at least get one person, out there shooting or, competing, or, even if you just find out there's one near you and you want to go watch. I mean, that's the cool thing, is you can sit there and watch, and, don't be overwhelmed with how it is. In parting, is there anything you guys else want to say before we leave?
Yeah, I just want to say, hey, I'm on the internet all over the place. John is. If you need help, you want questions, or you're afraid to ask in a public forum or anything like that, myself and all the rest of the Vudoo shooters, I see a bunch of them online here sending comments. I guarantee you, if you send one of us a private message or pick up a phone and get us on the phone, we'll be more than happy to help you out and steer you in the right direction. I love the sport. I love what Tyler and Travis have done with NRL 22. I appreciate Michael Al doing the Mars series, what we got at Lapua, at Peacemaker, and now with the PRS coming on. This sport is taken off like wildfire, and I recommend you get into it. At least come out and try it, but hit us up. We'll help you out.
Absolutely. Like what Tony said, all of us are more than willing to help new shooters. We all have extra gear with us, and we'll help you out. I've been putting up a couple of videos on the Long Range Tactics Facebook page, so those should be coming out here in a couple of days, kind of going into NRL 22 shooting. And then I do want to give out a shout out to Bushnell. You brought up Bushnell as one of the sponsors for the championship. For those of you guys that don't know, sponsors sometimes take care of the ROs. Bushnell went like above and beyond at the NRL championship, and they gave every single RO a pair of their Nitro. I think it was the Nitro binos.
Wow.
So they donated like 26 sets with tripods just for the ROs, in addition to the actual prize table and the actual banner sponsorship. So like, I'm giving credit where it's due. Like, they did a phenomenal job sponsoring the championship and taking care of the ROs.
Yeah. And one of the big things I noticed was Vudoo did go in with McMillan and a couple of others, and they did donate a couple of rifles, which is awesome. And I think one of our Utah boys took it all, Paul Dallin. Good job, Paul, on that. Isn't this like his second year doing it? Second or third year or something like that?
Back to back, man. The guy's on fire. And we're glad to have him on Team Vudoo now. He's now a Vudoo shooter. So welcome to the team.
John took off. He's got his freaking hillbilly Wi-Fi going up there with his tinfoil hat on. Thanks for coming back, John. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll try.
Anyway, again, hey, thanks you guys. I appreciate it. Again, if you guys want to reach out to these, Johnathon Solinsky, he's on Long Range Tactics. Tony G, he's all over too. Again, I can vouch for other great guys to, talk to and get information from. And Tony, I don't know what he does for a living, but he's always available, and he always talks to you. So, and I appreciate that. He's always done it. One thing before we leave, Tony, don't you have, what's the data books?
So I own Impact Data Books. We make precision rifle data books for center fire, rim fires, 3-gun. I have a book for F-class, silhouette. You name the sport, we got books for it. And so I'm a big proponent of using known data and collecting data, as well as getting new shooters to sit down, slow down when they shoot, and actually learn from collecting real world data. Vice just running a chart or playing with your Kestrel. I think you can see a lot of trends and shooting errors that you make. So I'm a big fan of it.
Rick, I told you, Mike, we can bring him anywhere nice. So, Tony, in the comments later, would you put a link to that? And we'll make sure we send people your way.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I appreciate it, everybody. Hope you have a good night. Join us next week if you want to learn some HS. And again, if there's something that you want to listen to on the podcast, let us know, because we're always open to, talking about different things and getting people on. Anyway, thank you. Have a good rest of your evening, and thanks for joining us.